You're listening to the Overfunctioning Leadership Podcast Brumble, leaving you with a fun fifth Tuesday's food for thought.
Hello, friends, to another Overfunctioning Leadership podcast version, and I believe this is a Brumble, correct?
It is a Brumble. And what does that mean?
I'm not sure, but you're going to tell us. I'm Alex.
I'm Zac, and we're Brumbling.
And John is not here today. Sometimes he shows up. Actually, never.
He's never been to a Brumble.
Brumble side. Zac, what's a Brumble again?
A Brumble is what we call a brain rumble. So in our marketing department, we had the guys really just think up two words that we could just force together, and they came up with Brumble, brain rumble.
Yeah, there was some Google forms that went out, asking Zac and I and several other in our company what should be the name of this thing, and this is the best we could come up with.
And actually, it's worked out. One of our most popular episodes was the Brumble on the overfunctioning origin stories.
Yeah, exactly.
So it was magic.
OFOs?
OFOs. OFOs.
So, anywho's, Zac, what's this Brumble going to be about?
Actually, it's a surprise to me. I'm waiting for any sort of pigeon or a telegram.
Oh, okay. I see what you're saying.
Yeah, so let me
An
know.
eel that I poked with a pin with a little flap of, like laminated, clearly.
You laminated an eel?
Yeah. Laminated an eel. Okay, so I thought as I was watching, listening to our podcast, perhaps watching on YouTube or listening on iTunes, Simplecast, Google Play, lots of different places. And I was thinking it might be fine time, Zac, to reiterate what the heck we're talking about. So we have this leadership podcast, but a lot of times we kind of just jump right into, okay, this is what we're going to talk about. So we're going to talk about maturity and commitment. So we're going to talk about pursuit and distance or blah, blah, blah. Well, actually, that'll be next week. But anyways. But we don't really talk about where this all comes from. We kind of hint at it, self-differentiation. We toss out Bowen. We're like, hey, we'll toss out Roberta Gilbert and blah, blah, blah. And Friedman, of course, because he's the father of all leadership books.
We love him.
So what are we talking about here? It might be a good time to talk specifically what the heck is our background, what's our foundation for this podcast?
So we're not just saying why is this important. We're saying where are we coming from that makes this important?
I think clearly we've established that this is important.
I want to use the word important to signify the importance of this conversation. Yeah. So we're talking from systems theory. And
specifically Bowen family systems theory.
Which is huge because he has 8 concepts that basically have defined what systems theory is from a psychological perspective, that he actually originated when he was observing the relationship between a mother and her schizophrenic child in a closed clinical study. And when they removed all of the other relationships, he saw how powerful the dynamics between two people are and how big of an influence it is just those two relationships, and how there are certain basic patterns or commonalities in the way that they behaved that he could see in other behaviors that led eventually to these 8 concepts. One of those being triangles, where you have the schizophrenic mother, the child, and their illness. And from that starting point, he built this whole concept, and that's important because it gives us a perspective and a lens.
Now, you've read through there's a massive book where all of this stuff comes from, correct?
Yeah.
And as far as this book goes, did they talk about does it get to a point to where he starts working with the leaders of the family?
Yeah. So I actually haven't gotten to that part of the book yet, but
it is quite girthy.
Yeah, it's actually a compilation for those of you who are interested. It's a $60 or so book that's just a compilation of all of the articles he wrote from the beginning of his career to the end of his career that shows the progress and the culmination of this systems theory. But he eventually gets to the point where he says that rather than working with the people in the system as a whole, which is almost where you would imagine this to come from.
Which in this case, when we're talking about schizophrenia, we're talking about not specifically not working with the child themselves, even though you would do that within a clinical, type of deal. But instead of working with them specifically. In addition, maybe working with the adult or the leader of the family.
Yeah. So when we would say family systems theory, I would imagine any therapy would be done through the whole family. Let's get them all in here and let's work it out. But in actuality, what this means is bringing in the most differentiated person, the person who is trying to lead this herd to greener pastures, and saying, hey, we know you want to make this better. Let's make you better at managing yourself. And that will inherently help the system. Now, you want to speak a little more on that?
So that is a big piece of what's going on here. And we'll say this a lot within our podcasts of specifically a family, but I would say, willing to say, within any system, can't go any larger, can't be... They can go only as high as their highest member. So the person that's most self-differentiated, they cannot go any higher than that leader if they're leaders of that specific system. And so specifically within a family system, that if you're a child and you're listening to this, family systems theory that would suggest that you can no longer go any higher in self-differentiation than your parent.
And this is, of course, we're going to add some disclaimers here. This is looking at it theoretically. If you even just look up how they measure differentiation, they very clearly say this is a imagining of what it looks like. It's going to vary, and you got to take points. On one day, you're going to be a 60 if you're like a genius, and on other days, you're going to be a 40, 45, and it's going to average out.
Yeah.
But 70 pluses or, the golden sheep, like you never find them.
Yeah, like once in every 200 years or something.
And all that to say is when we say you can't grow higher than the most differentiated person in your system, that's very much just saying if that is your system and you have no other influences, there is very, very, very little chance, they round that up to not possible, a chance of you becoming more differentiated than the leader in that system.
Yeah, and so it really opens up a lot of understanding of why different family systems specifically, or even if you start looking at different systems. So systems we're talking about, so I'm a teacher and I have a classroom, that is my current system. But then you could also look at the school. The school itself, the high school is a system. You could go to your business, and your business is a system. Your community, like the city that you live in is a system. Your state, so on and so forth. So then you have a whole lot of different types of systems, but what it really comes down to is that family system. And so Bowen would say that you working on yourself to increase the self-differentiation of yourself will increase the functioning of your own family, which will make things a lot better overall. And so with that, we've been dropping this word self-differentiation a lot. What kind of does that entail, Zach?
So we actually have an episode or two out on that, which, of course, you should check out. It's actually one of our more popular episodes because we talk about it so much. But when we talk about self-differentiation, we're basically saying, what is, if we're going to reduce it to maturity, what is your maturity? What is the way that you look at yourself and you say, I am this person regardless of the people I'm around? There's this competing idea of you either a solid self or you're a pseudo self. And that is to say, if Alex and I were talking about how he loves the Mighty Boosh and, I'm just looking up to him and I'm like, oh man, I want him to like me. I'm going to say I love the Mighty Boosh. And then I go over to a friend's house and he's like, I hate the Mighty Boosh. And I say, I hate the Mighty Boosh too. You're looking at people who are just absorbing pieces of other self to fill in what they don't have. And so that comes from, I know I'm rambling a little bit, but that comes...
Just disclaimer, the Mighty Boosh is a TV show.
British late-night TV show. We do not recommend it if you're under the age of 15 or 17 or 18 or 9. Be an adult.
It's British humor. So anyways, self-differentiation.
And so what we're really saying is, when you're around these people, what makes up who you are? And so we've talked about convictions a lot and guiding principles, and that is to say, what are the pieces of yourself that you lean on? So if I lean on Alex's opinion of me, my opinions are going to be changing with his opinions. But if I define myself as someone who, and I do, I view myself as someone who, I view myself as a patient person. And so that's something that's going to affect the way that I interact with people, as compared to, say, maybe if I'm in a very reactive system. If I define myself as someone who's patient, I'm less likely to be brought up to quick words, anger. And so there's this big emphasis in discovering who you are, not necessarily in a this is what I like, this is what I don't like, but in more of a what is guiding you and what are the things that you would endure pains for before you discard them.
Yeah. And then within that is being able to react or respond to anxiety. And
Huge
so we've talked
core
about
concept.
anxiety a lot. So chronic anxiety is the one that's just sitting around the whole time. And then acute anxiety is like a bus is coming towards me and I do something about the fight, flight, or freeze. So a lot of it is how are you going to respond?
Fight or flight.
Fight or flight. Freeze is in there.
Freeze?
Yeah, freeze is there. So like the bus is coming, I don't move. So that's not good either. But anyways, and you're going to fight the bus, but whatever.
Freeze the bus?
Freeze the bus.
Freeze, stop.
Yeah, So but within that, so high anxiety within a system, am I going to react to it? Reactions, I would be on the side that says the reactions aren't a good thing, unless it's this fight, flight, or freeze. So reactions can lead to be a lot of anger or really emotional a lot of times. And so we are emotional beings, which is great, but sometimes our emotions can overcome us, and then that doesn't make for best results. And a response is like, I've thought through this, and then I'm going to make a decision based off of my response instead of just quick snap reactions. And our snap reactions come from our family. And so that's why it's part of Bowen family systems theory talks a lot about family, because we have inherited these reactions. So when this happens, most likely I go to this, which in other episodes we've talked about overfunctioning or underfunctioning, cutoff or fusion. There's lots of different types of things that can happen when you react. And that's just because of the type of family you were growing up into, and it's generational. Like I was talking to somebody just the other day, and they're talking about like, oh, my mom is always like this, and I'm like, well, what was your grandma like? Oh, she's the same way. And I'm like, what do you think her mom was like? The exact same thing. It just keeps getting passed down. But what is awesome about Bowen family systems theory is that as a leader, as a person, you could say, you know what? I have an opportunity to stop this cycle right here, and be more responsive and grow that my own self-differentiation so that that way there's not as much anxiety within the system. Maybe not, I guess you would kind of decrease anxiety, but being able to respond to it in which it can reduce the anxiety, which reduces the amount of emotional reaction, which can make, in my eyes, I would say that system would be a lot healthier.
Yeah, and so we're taking this idea of anxiety, and so looping back to what started this conversation, when you take the leader of a system, when you say, hey, you want to grow the system, let's work on you. Let's not bring in the person who's pulling the system down. Let's bring the person who's going to be an example and who's going to reduce the anxiety. We talk about how the leader is often the dampener. Friedman has a book called Failure of Nerve, and a large part of that is because as a leader, in order to succeed, you really have to be able to bear those anxieties, or else you're going to crumble. And you're going to crumble if it's not founded on convictions, because it's uncomfortable. We've talked about sabotage, and so all of this relates to this emotional versus rational mindset. The way that we were taught in accordance with resilient leadership, thanks, John. We actually learned from that book, the second edition, right? Resilient 2.0 is the real second edition.
Yes.
But we learned from
the
this.
First one.
We're the second
1.0.
edition of the first one. Yeah, way too confusing. Anyway, there's a iceberg, and we've all heard about the Titanic. It looks like a little tiny ice cap like sticking out of the water, and underneath, the majority of the mass is submerged beneath the water, and you can't see that. And that is the emotional processes that are underneath. And so when we take the leader and we say, hey, we know you are probably the most responsible person in the system, but did you know there's this whole side of you that is driving the way that you react, the way that you respond, and regardless of whether you're the best person in the system or not, there's an opportunity for you to learn how you're responding and to respond better.
I wouldn't say that people don't think that they have this emotional realm. They know that, but they just didn't realize how it's connected to how they're leading people. And so that's what, for Zach and I and John and anybody who's been in contact with any of this stuff, have like set back and gone, oh my gosh, this is like really does affect how I live my life and how I interact with people. And so that's where, for me, it's made a giant impact. It's changed my lens on how I see things, because I can see things from a systems theory. And when people are giving me a hard time because they're being more reactionary, emotional, if I can step back and think through, like, it really humbles me and to a point where I'm like, okay, this is probably, there's something else going on here. It's really not about me here. It's about something else that's pushed them to this point, unless I've been a complete ding dong and made a really bad decision, right? But most likely, in most cases, I would say people's reactions, especially people you don't really know that well, it has nothing to do with you. So when you're driving down the road, somebody cuts you off, they could be a complete jerk, but there might be something else going on. They may beep at you, whatever. Something else is behind, and it's most likely they're not really thought through and be like, oh man, this person's been a jerk to me for this long, and now I'm going to be mad at them. They're not really thinking through that.
And so we've trained up how we respond. We've trained up these reactions. We've learned them from our parents. We've learned them from our peers, especially our parents, though, our family of origin. And so we're saying, hey, let's take the way that you react and let's turn it into a way that you respond. And let's make you someone who is dampening the anxiety in their system and hopefully leading other people to think in a similar way. And so when we talk about looking at this lens, one of the big parts of Bowens' perspective, his theory that he brings to this, is it's actually formed on the commonalities of human behavior and responses. And what he's saying is, when you look at Freud is psychoanalytic therapy, I believe, is what it boils down to. And he's saying, hey, you are an individual, and it's what makes you an individual that we need to dig into and to understand. And let's go back to your childhood. It's your unique experiences that have shaped who you are, and that's why you behave the way you do. And what Bowen's saying is, yes, you are an individual and you're unique, and that's important, but it's what's common to human behavior that actually draws us all together. We have much more in common than we have separate. And so he built that into these spectrums, fusion and cutoff,
overfunctioning, underfunctioning, all sorts of different things. And so what's good about this theory also is that it's cross-cultural. It can work in all sorts of different systems. Everybody all the time is dealing with anxiety. And so if you can just back it up and to make it's almost making it more simple in my eyes, but you have to just know the terminology. So a lot of times during podcasts, we're using all these different terms, but it all boils down, it all comes back down to Bowen family systems theory.
Yeah, I've thought a lot about how we like to name everything nowadays. I have ADHD, I have FPQTL, or, I have these letters that define me, and I'm going to take the stigma and the connotations that are associated with that, and I'm going to use that to define me. And what I like about this is it's saying, hey, there are these common things that define you. You either cut off or you fuse when you enter anxiety. And if you look to your mom or your dad, you're probably going to see that behavior was in them as well, or maybe your grandparents. And so from that, it's just this nice starting point to say, hey, I'm not defined by these behavioral traits, but they are a starting point to determine who I am and how I can relate better to people in a way that is conscious and rational rather than emotional and reactive.
Yeah. I think that pretty much sums it up. I think, is there anything else?
No, I mean, I didn't know what we were doing when we came into this. So this is all off the cuff.
Yeah. No, so we love this stuff, so it's really easy to talk about. So a couple books that we mentioned, Resilient Leadership by Bob Duggan and Jim Moyer. Solid book. If you're just getting into this stuff, I would say that it's got a nice narrative to it. I would say the 1.0, not the 2.0, is good. 2.0 is going to be jumping right to the define things and more.
The 1.0 is
nerdy.
Just a really long narrative, and inside of that narrative, one of the characters is being mentored in leadership theory, and that's how you learn it. In the second one, they're teaching you the theory, and then they're providing smaller narratives.
Yeah.
So we learned off of the first, and it's a soft spot in our hearts.
Yeah, and then you have Roberta M. Gilbert. She does. She's a doctor, has her doctorate, and she's written about extraordinary leadership, the cornerstone concept, extraordinary relationships. Those are going to be more theory based, but they are really easy reads and they're really thin. So
And she's got articles online that you can find pretty easily, very informative.
yeah, and then we go to the most difficult of the reads, which is going to be Edwin H. Friedman. He's got Generation to Generation, and this is going to talk about a lot about what we were talking about earlier. And then the Taste de Resistance is a failure of nerve. This book, it's going to take you a long time to read through just because it's so thick on theory. So anyways, this is like if you accomplish all those things, and then I would jump to A Failure to Nerve.
He changed my life, and I didn't even finish the book, just the introduction. Sad fact about this, he actually passed while he was writing it.
Yeah.
And so they only had his manuscripts for, I think, after the first third. It's in 3 parts, I believe.
Yeah.
And so they took his manuscripts post-haste and were like, let's finish this book for Friedman. And it changed my life, but I'm only through the introduction.
So I think we're pretty good here. So with that, I check us out on iTunes, YouTube, Google Play.
Yeah, send us a story. We don't know what story or why you're sending it to us, but we love interaction from our listeners. The many occasions of listener interaction we've already had has been grossly positive.
Oh,
so,
yes, it's been really good. So, yeah, any questions you have, anything you want us to go over, we're gladly going to do that as well. So, and movies, we do also do Zammers, which are here and there.
And look forward to our next month. This is this and the next 2 episodes are off of new equipment, so we're hoping that it comes out real crisp and clean, just silk to your ears.
And in the next one, we've got a guest, so Adam Harder. So he's really into frogs.
A lot about frogs.
And games and math.
He's an eccentric person, but we love him.
He's pretty awesome.
Yeah.
So, anyways, but with that, this is the Brumble, and
I'm
Alex.
Brumble, and I'm Zach.
And we'll see you next time.
Keep your brains rumbling.